The galaxy was vast, filled with countless species, each with its unique cultures and ways of life. Among them were the Zalorans, a race known for their brilliant bioluminescent skin and deep connection to the natural world. Their eyes, large and expressive, spoke of wisdom beyond their years. But now, their glow was dimmed, and their world, once a lush paradise, had become a desolate wasteland. The war had been swift and brutal, leaving no corner of their planet untouched. The Zalorans, once a thriving community, were now reduced to a handful of orphans, huddled together in the ruins of their home. Their parents, elders, and protectors had fallen, victims of a galactic conflict they neither started nor understood. The Zaloran children, with their delicate forms and fragile spirits, were left alone to fend for themselves in a universe that seemed to have forgotten them. The Galactic Federation, busy with the politics and economics of rebuilding, saw the Zaloran orphans as nothing more than a statistic, a casualty of war. Aid was requested, but the response was cold and distant. Resources were scarce, they said. There were more pressing matters, more significant crises to address. Neighboring species, once allies of the Zalorans, turned a blind eye. Fear of the unknown, of the remnants of a war-torn race, kept them at bay. Rumors spread that the Zalorans carried a curse, that their proximity brought misfortune. Superstition fueled prejudice, and soon, the orphans were more isolated than ever. The Zalorans' bioluminescence, which had once been a symbol of their vibrant culture, now marked them as outcasts. No one wanted to shoulder the burden of these children, not in a galaxy where survival was already a daily struggle. Amidst this indifference, a human diplomat stationed at a nearby space outpost caught wind of the situation. His name was Captain Elias Drayton, a man known for his empathy and his stubborn refusal to accept injustice. The reports of the Zaloran orphans tugged at his heart, a feeling he couldn't ignore. He had heard the whispers, the warnings from his colleagues. They told him it wasn't his problem, that the Zalorans were a lost cause, another tragic footnote in the galaxy's history. But Elias couldn't shake the image of those children, their bioluminescent eyes filled with despair, waiting for someone, anyone, to save them. Elias knew what it was like to be alone, to feel abandoned by the world. It was a feeling he had carried with him from his own troubled childhood on Earth. He understood the pain of loss, the sting of being forgotten. And so, despite the cautionary advice, despite the bureaucratic red tape, he made a decision. He would not stand by and do nothing. He would not let these children become victims of apathy. He would act. The resolve in his heart was as strong as the steel of the ships he commanded. He knew the risks, the potential consequences of going against orders, but none of that mattered. These orphans needed someone to stand up for them, and Elias Drayton was willing to be that person. As he prepared to set out on his mission, he felt a sense of purpose, a clarity that had been absent for far too long. The galaxy might have deserted these children, but he would not. This was not just a rescue. It was a stand against the cold, indifferent universe that had turned its back on the most vulnerable. And as he boarded his ship, Elias knew that this was only the beginning. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready. The Zaloran orphans had found their champion, and he would not rest until they were safe. In the cold silence of space, the humans sat alone, surrounded by maps, data pads, and holographic displays. Their mind raced, calculating every possible outcome. The orphan species required specific conditions to survive: temperature, atmosphere, and sustenance. The human meticulously gathered supplies, adjusting the life support systems of their ship to mimic the orphan's home world. The task was complex, but failure was not an option. The planet where the orphans were stranded was desolate, ravaged by a recent conflict that had left it quarantined. The human ship hummed as it approached the perimeter, sensors alert to any sign of danger. They had studied the environment, knowing full well the risks. Hostile drones patrolled the area, remnants of the war that had devastated the planet. The humans' resolve hardened as they steered the ship through the debris field, dodging the occasional drone that still lingered. As the ship descended, the humans' heart pounded. They had to find the orphans quickly. Landing near the last known coordinates, they disembarked, the air thick with dust and the remnants of what had once been a thriving civilization. Moving swiftly, they scanned the area, following the faint signals of life. Each step was calculated, every sound analyzed. Then they saw them, huddled together in the ruins of a building, their eyes wide with fear. The orphans, small and frail, bore the marks of their species: luminous skin that pulsed with soft light, delicate limbs, and large, expressive eyes. Their bodies trembled, sensing the approach of another potential threat. The human knelt at a distance, speaking softly, offering food and water. But the orphans recoiled, memories of past abandonment fresh in their minds. The human understood. They placed the supplies down and stepped back, watching as the smallest orphan cautiously approached. The human waited, patient and unthreatening, as the orphan sniffed the air, testing for danger. Slowly, the others followed, their hunger and thirst overcoming their fear. The human's eyes softened, watching as the orphans tentatively accepted the food. Hours passed. The human stayed nearby, ensuring the orphans felt safe. Gradually, they inched closer, offering more supplies and gentle reassurances. The orphans, wary but curious, began to see the human as different from the others who had left them behind. One of the older orphans, braver than the rest, approached the human directly, looking into their eyes with a mix of suspicion and hope. The human smiled, extending a hand, which the orphan touched lightly before retreating to the safety of the group. It was time to leave. The human signaled the orphans, who hesitated, fear of the unknown holding them back. But the human spoke softly, urging them to follow, promising safety. One by one, the orphans stood, their trust in the human outweighing their fear. Together, they made their way back to the ship, the human keeping a careful watch for any threats. As they approached the ship, an alarm blared. A drone had locked onto them. The human acted quickly, pushing the orphans ahead while drawing a weapon. The drone's metallic eyes gleamed as it descended, its weapons charging. The human fired, disabling the drone just as it launched an attack. The blast missed, striking the ground beside them, sending up a cloud of dust. The orphans cried out, scattering in fear. The human called to them, voice steady despite the chaos. Another drone appeared on the horizon, but there was no time for a fight. The human gathered the orphans, leading them into the ship. As the hatch sealed, the human sprinted to the cockpit, engines roaring to life. The ship lifted off, the drones in pursuit. The human's hands moved with precision, guiding the ship through the dense atmosphere. The drones fired, but the ship's shields held, absorbing the blasts. The human pushed the engines to their limits, navigating through the debris with skill. The drones, unable to match the ship's speed, fell behind, their shots becoming more desperate and inaccurate. Finally, they broke free of the planet's gravity, the drones disappearing from the sensors. The human exhaled, slumping back in the seat, tension draining from their body. In the cargo hold, the orphans huddled together, eyes wide with both fear and awe. The human joined them, kneeling down to their level, offering a reassuring smile. They were safe for now. The journey was far from over, but the hardest part was behind them. The orphans, still wary, began to relax, their trust in the human growing stronger. The human knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they were determined. These orphans had been abandoned by the galaxy, but not by them. They would not fail. The ship was quiet, the hum of the engines a constant background as the humans sat down to review the day's challenges. The orphans were safe, but their survival was just the beginning. The human had prepared for this, studying their physiology and cultural habits, but real life was always more complex than data. The first problem was food. The orphans rejected most of what was offered, their bodies unable to process human sustenance. The human had anticipated this and carefully synthesized the nutrients they needed, replicating the diet from their home planet. It wasn't perfect. Some of the orphans fell ill, their bodies struggling to adapt, but the human worked tirelessly, adjusting the formula, ensuring they received the care they needed. Gradually, the orphans began to eat more, their health stabilizing, a small victory in the ongoing battle for their well-being. Communication was another barrier. The orphans' language was a blend of sound, gesture, and bioluminescent signals, and the humans struggled to understand them fully. Misunderstandings were frequent, leading to frustration on both sides. The human persisted, learning the nuances of their language, teaching the orphans basic human words and phrases in return. It was slow work, but every small breakthrough brought them closer together. The human would often sit with the orphans, mimicking their gestures, learning their ways, and slowly, trust began to grow. Yet trust was fragile. The orphans had been abandoned before, and their emotional wounds were deep. Nightmares plagued them, and the human often found them huddled together, trembling. The human would stay with them, offering comfort in the dark, their presence a steady reassurance that they were not alone. Bit by bit, the orphans began to seek out the human, a hand to hold, a presence to calm their fears. The bond was forming, slowly, but it was there, an unspoken connection forged through care and understanding. But outside the ship, the world was not as understanding. Word of the human's actions had spread, and not everyone approved. The human received messages, some subtle, others not, questioning their decision to take in the orphans. Legal challenges arose, with accusations of endangerment and improper care. The humans spent hours navigating the complex web of intergalactic law, defending their right to protect the orphans. Officials visited, scrutinizing every aspect of their care, looking for reasons to take the orphans away. Each time, the humans stood firm, presenting their case with calm determination. Social backlash was harder to bear. The humans' peers distanced themselves, some out of fear, others out of prejudice. The orphans were seen as different, and difference was often met with suspicion. There were whispers, warnings to stay away, to leave the orphans to their fate. But the human refused to abandon them. They knew the orphans needed love, stability, a chance to heal. No amount of pressure could sway their resolve. The orphans had become more than just a responsibility, they were family. Despite the challenges, there were moments of joy. The human introduced the orphans to human traditions, small celebrations that brought light to their lives. The first time they played a game together, the orphans' laughter filled the ship, a sound so pure it brought tears to the humans' eyes. The orphans, once timid and fearful, began to open up, their personalities shining through. They asked questions, curious about the human's world, eager to learn. The human taught them about the stars, about different cultures, about the value of kindness and empathy. One day, the orphans surprised the human by attempting to teach them one of their own games. It was complex, a blend of strategy and physical skill, but the human joined in, stumbling through the rules, laughing with the orphans as they played. It was a small thing, but it signified so much. The orphans were beginning to trust again, to feel safe enough to share a piece of themselves. The human knew that this was the true victory, not in the battles fought outside, but in the bond growing stronger within. Their life together wasn't perfect. There were still obstacles, moments of fear and doubt, but they faced them together, as a family. The orphans, once lost and abandoned, had found a new home, not just in the physical space of the ship, but in the heart of the human who had refused to give up on them. And the human, once alone in their mission, now had a family they never expected, a group of small, luminous beings who had come to mean everything. The human looked at the orphans, now sleeping peacefully, their fears soothed, their future brighter. It hadn't been an easy journey, and it was far from over, but they knew they would face whatever came next together. In the quiet of the ship, under the watchful glow of the stars, a new family had been forged, not by blood, but by love, trust, and the simple, unwavering belief that no one should be left behind. The alert came without warning, a sharp, shrill sound that cut through the quiet. The humans' eyes narrowed as they read the transmission. A galactic faction had taken an interest in the orphans, their intent clear: reclaim them by any means necessary. It wasn't out of compassion or responsibility, but rather for control, seeing the orphans as valuable assets. The humans' blood ran cold at the thought of them being used, manipulated, or worse. There was no time to waste. The human immediately set to work, analyzing the data, calculating the time they had before the threat arrived. Every second counted. The ship was equipped for survival, but not for battle. The humans' first thought was to flee, but the orphans had grown attached to this place, and the idea of uprooting them again felt like a last resort. Still, survival was the priority. The human began fortifying their position, reinforcing the ship's defenses, and preparing for the worst. They sent out discreet messages to a few trusted contacts, asking for aid. Most responded with hesitation or silence, unwilling to involve themselves in what was clearly becoming a dangerous situation. But there were a few who offered help: an old friend with a ship equipped for combat, a trader who promised to delay the enemy's approach, buying them precious time. The human was grateful, but knew they couldn't rely on outside help alone. The orphans sensed the tension, their usual playful demeanor replaced with quiet anxiety. The human gathered them, explaining the situation in simple terms. The orphans huddled together, fear in their wide eyes, but there was something else: trust. They believed the human could protect them. That belief was a weight the human carried with both pride and trepidation. As the threat drew closer, the human worked tirelessly, going over every contingency. The orphans watched, some trying to help in their small ways, organizing supplies, staying out of the way, even practicing the few defense techniques the human had taught them. Their innocence and courage only deepened the human's resolve. The external threat was formidable, but the human knew that the orphans were counting on them. When the enemy's ship finally appeared on the scanners, the human's heart pounded, but their mind was clear. They had prepared as best they could. The orphans gathered in a secure area of the ship, their luminous skin dimmed with fear. The human activated the defenses, the ship humming with energy as shields were raised and weapons readied. They watched the enemy vessel approach, calculating every move, anticipating every possibility. The first strike came as expected, a powerful energy beam that slammed into the ship's shields. The human gritted their teeth, adjusting the power distribution to maintain the shield integrity. The enemy was relentless, their attacks precise and deadly. The human countered with everything they had, launching volleys of return fire, using the ship's maneuverability to evade the worst of the enemy's assault. But the enemy was well prepared, and their tactics were ruthless. The human realized they were being herded, pushed toward a vulnerable position. The orphans, sensing the danger, huddled closer, their fear palpable. The human made a quick decision: this was no longer a battle they could win by conventional means. Drawing on their knowledge of the ship's systems and the environment, the human initiated a series of calculated maneuvers, using the terrain of a nearby asteroid field to their advantage. They led the enemy into a trap, using the asteroids as both cover and weapons. The ship weaved through the field with expert precision, the enemy forced to follow. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and it would be over. The orphans watched the displays, eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. They had seen the human do incredible things, but this was different. This was survival. The human's hands moved swiftly over the controls, every command deliberate, every decision critical. The enemy's ship faltered, struggling to keep up with the human's tactics. The human seized the opportunity, launching a barrage of fire that struck a critical point in the enemy's hull. There was a moment of silence, the enemy's ship drifting, systems failing. The human didn't wait to see if they would recover. They activated the final phase of their plan, triggering a chain reaction within the asteroid field. The explosion was massive, a shockwave that sent debris hurtling in every direction. The human ship, already on the edge of the blast radius, powered away at full speed, the enemy's ship engulfed in the destruction. As the ship cleared the danger zone, the human exhaled, tension draining from their body. They checked the systems, confirming that the danger had passed. The orphans, still shaken, looked to the human with wide eyes, their trust reaffirmed by the victory. The human smiled, weary but relieved. They had done it. They had protected their new family. The orphans approached, their fear giving way to gratitude and admiration. They didn't need words to express what they felt. Their actions spoke volumes. The human knelt, opening their arms, and the orphans rushed forward, embracing them. In that moment, the human knew that the bond they had forged was unbreakable. They had faced the worst, together, and come out stronger. The threat was gone, but the experience had changed them all. The human looked at the orphans, now their family, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, as they always had. The bond between them was no longer just one of survival. It was one of love, trust, and the unshakable certainty that they would never be alone again. The silence after the battle was almost overwhelming. The ship drifted through the stars, far from the chaos they had just escaped. The orphans were quiet, their energy spent, but their eyes were bright with a new sense of security. The human looked at them, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over them. They had made it through, but now came the task of rebuilding, of finding a way to move forward. In the days that followed, the human focused on repairing the ship, patching up the damage from the confrontation. The orphans helped where they could, small hands handing over tools, mimicking the human's actions with surprising accuracy. They were no longer just passengers. They were part of the crew, learning, adapting, growing stronger together. At night, when the ship was quiet, the human would sit with the orphans, talking about their journey, reflecting on how far they had come. The orphans, once timid and scared, now listened with wide eyes, understanding more than they let on. They spoke, too, sharing memories of their past, of the world they had lost. It was painful, but necessary, a step toward healing. The human listened, offering comfort, but also marveling at the resilience these young ones showed. They had faced so much and yet had found the strength to trust again, to hope. But even as they rebuilt, the human couldn't shake the question that had been nagging at them. What next? The galaxy was vast, and while they had won this battle, they knew it wouldn't be the last. The orphans needed a place where they could grow, thrive, and be safe, a home that the human, despite all their efforts, couldn't provide forever. The thought weighed heavily on them, the idea of letting go, of finding a new path for these beings who had become their family. The decision loomed over them, a final challenge that had no easy answers. The human pondered options, settling on a remote planet, finding a community that would accept the orphans, or even searching for others of their kind. But every option felt incomplete, each with risks that the human wasn't sure they were ready to take. The orphans, sensing the human's unease, began to ask questions of their own. Where would they go? What would happen to them? The human struggled with how to answer, not wanting to burden them with the uncertainty they felt. But as the days passed, the orphans began to offer their own suggestions, small at first, then more confident. They spoke of places they had heard about, of dreams they had, of the kind of home they wished for. Their ideas were simple, yet profound, more about safety and love than about location. The human realized then that the orphans weren't just passengers on this journey. They were active participants in their own futures. They had grown, not just in trust and skills, but in understanding and wisdom beyond their years. It was this realization that brought the human clarity. The decision wasn't theirs alone to make, it belonged to all of them. Together, they discussed the options, weighing the risks and rewards. The orphans, with their unique perspectives, offered insights the human hadn't considered. Slowly, a plan began to form, one that felt right for all of them. It wasn't just about finding a place to live, it was about building a future together, wherever that might be. In the end, they chose a place far from the central hubs of the galaxy, a small, peaceful world that offered both seclusion and opportunity. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. The human knew that this would be a place where the orphans could grow, where they could find a sense of belonging and safety. And more importantly, it was a place where they could stay together, as a family. The journey to their new home was filled with a mix of anticipation and bittersweet reflection. The orphans, excited yet nervous, asked endless questions about what it would be like. The human answered patiently, but also took time to remind them of how far they had come. They talked about the battles they had fought, the trust they had built, and the love that had grown between them. The orphans listened, nodding, their fears easing with every word. When they finally arrived, the planet was everything they had hoped for. The air was clean, the land fertile, and the sky filled with stars that promised peace. As they stepped off the ship, the human felt a deep sense of contentment. This was where they were meant to be. The orphans, too, seemed to understand, their eyes bright with the possibilities that lay before them. As they began to settle in, planting roots, both literally and figuratively, the human felt the weight of the past few months lifting. They had faced countless challenges, But in doing so, they had found something far more valuable, a family forged not by blood, but by shared experiences, by love and trust. The human knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. In the quiet moments that followed, as they watched the orphans play in the fields, the humans smiled. They had found their home, and in doing so, they had found something even more precious, a future filled with hope, love, and the unbreakable bond of family.